Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Spooktober. This was meant to be Friday's video, but anyway. Yeah. Previously, for the week's videos, I made one on Occam's razor and understanding the most likely explanations because there needs, and I strongly believe this, there needs to be a bit of skepticism and thought really put into examining paranormal. Now, that said, there are also things that are a little harder to dismiss. For example, I have up Bigfoot, Sasquatch. So rampant are the sightings. Sightings that go back. We're not talking its first one in 1950s. No. These are sightings that go back decades, centuries. There are several Native American tribes that treat them almost as if they were actual regular animals, as the coyote, the fox, the bear. The wolf, the beaver, many tribes treat them upon that same footing. And, it has to be from somewhere. It can't just be a big made up term that happened ho hum. Meanwhile, in the Himalayan mountain regions, the abominable snowman, the Yeti, the reports had been around for quite a while. British explorer David Thompson, sometimes credited with the first discovery in 1811, with a set of footprints and hundreds of alleged prints uh, and hundreds of alleged prints have been taken since then. The legend grew in 1924 with what is now called Ape Canyon, when some prospectors had a violent encounter. I think they hid in a cabin overnight and could not sleep. Yeah. Um, After they wounded one of the creatures during the day, the mountain devils, as they called them, returned that night, pelting the cabin with boulders and repeatedly ramming the structure. When the attack ended at daylight, they fled. The account is later discredited by U.S. forest rangers, who notably proved that the footprints were fake. But the story did spread. Ape Canyon is where it's now known. It's on Mount St. Helens. But yeah, and of course, one of the most famous pieces of evidence is the Bluff Creek Patterson-Gimlin footage. The little clip that shows this creature just walking away. There's so many suggestions. And not just that. You often have similar tales worldwide. During Vietnam, rock apes. You have mentions of other types. In Siberia, the almas. There's the mink, the almasti, the what are some other names? Goodness. It's just, yeah. They have been sighted the world over. It's just weird. Because there is so much in the realm of, hey, these have been constantly sighted. This is from the Bigfoot Research Organization. Before you say anything, yes, I know some people may be like, oh, this is questionable evidence. But these are sightings some people have reported. So, at least give it some examination. The big one, Washington State. 723 listed sightings. Ohio, 326. California, 463. Florida, 344. Illinois, 304. Michigan, 225. Now, the Michigan-Illinois area is also connected to sightings of what's known as the Dogman, but that's not what we're talking about. But you can see how some of the sightings are kind of spread out. You have the Michigan, Ohio, Illinois area up in the Midwest. You have California and Washington State on the West Coast. And then you have Florida down on the southeast. So yeah, even Oregon, also on the West Coast, 260. So yeah. You have a number of sightings all over some of these different places. And that's just the U.S. As I said, Canada. The big one is always British Columbia, Vancouver, which is down here. So British Columbia, and then next is Ontario here, Toronto, I think. It's like here or something. That's the big population centers. And then Alberta, which contains cities like Calgary and Edmonton, Manitoba, which, I'm sorry, Manitoba, I can't think of big cities in Manitoba, I'm not sure. But yeah. And then, of course, you have single digits in the rest of them. And then international sightings they've recorded. And again, this is just the BFRO sighting database. Um, there's other sightings I'm sure they don't even have recorded here. The big one, Malaysia. Southeast Asia is your Malaysia. You have a lot of, well, Malaysia, Indonesia, that area of the world, Southeast Asia, a lot of the island nations island chain nations, I should say, off of the mainland continent. Yeah. The Australia, all of one sighting, but it's known for what's a very similar creature, the Yowie. We talked about the Yeti, abominable snowman, Russia. We said in Siberia, which is more or less the eastern end of Russia, in that vast expanse, the Alma. And then you have other countries in region 6. So yeah. The sightings are all over. They go back a ways. There's always difficulties when you have ancient tales, but there's something there. Something, clearly, that everybody is seeing. That is clear over and over and over. One of one of the more thing that seems to get no real clear indication: spontaneous human combustion. We don't know how real it is, because some of it, hey, look, something can happen in the correct order, and yeah, you see a lot of people perish in fires that don't seem to really do much to the rest of the surrounding area. It's just in a very localized area. Often the victim and the immediate furniture or whatever. We honestly, we don't know. There are theories often that it's some kind of health issues connected to something that sets off a spark, usually smoking. Although, again, we don't know. At one point, people used to think it was connected to alcohol, which a lot of the victims were consumers of alcohol. But yeah, Yeah, usually, uh, according to a published book, 1823, medical jurisprudence claim the commonalities, although I don't know how many of them are still connectable, but victims are chronic alcoholics, which again easily could be someone. If you drink, you might smoke. Most of them tend to be elderly females. Elderly in general, I noticed 50s and above, they tend to be. Body was not burned spontaneously, but some lighted substance has come into contact with it. Again, one of these proclamations that it may be something that caused a spark, but again, is it open? What is the fuel source? Is because they often claim human fat, but what is happening? Is it an open wound? I know one of the proclamations they make in here is maybe it's people who have had health issues and thus dropping cigarettes. We don't know. The hands and feet usually fall off. And one thing they do cite, feet usually have little to no fat for them to really burn. So yeah, the fire has caused very little damage to combustible things in contact with the body. That's what we talked about. Very localized, the damage it does. The combustion of the body has left a residue of greasy and fetid ashes, very offensive in odor. Again, we think it's using a fuel source like human fat. But yeah, almost all postulated cases of spontaneous human combustion involve people with low mobility due to advanced age or obesity, along with poor health, showing a high likelihood of having died in their sleep or having been unable to move once they had caught fire. Smoking often listed as the cause of the fire, but again, I don't think cigarettes can burn through the body. Yeah, the fat will catch fire very easily and work as a easy flame, but yeah. The wick effect hypothesis suggests that a small external flame source, such as a burning cigarette, chars the clothing of the victim at a location, splitting the skin and releasing subcutaneous fat, which is in turn absorbed into the burned clothing, acting as a wick. So it's saying the clothing gets so hot it causes the skin to split open. There's still so much that it's like, maybe, but it's hard to really say. But also stuff like this, a new subatomic particle which is called a pyrodron. No. 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 Fire in and of itself is caused by chemical connections. It's not a pyrotron. Yeah. examples. Perhaps the most famous example, Mary Reeser, 67-year-old woman, in July of 1951, burns up. The doorknob was unusually warm. Landlady notified the police. They found Reeser's remains completely burned into ash and only one leg remaining. Again, the feet don't have much in the way of fat. With the chair she's sitting in is destroyed. Sleeping pills, smoker, so they say maybe that's how she caught fire. Despite its proliferation in popular culture, the contemporary FBI investigation ruled out the possibility of spontaneous human combustion. A common theory is that she was smoking a cigarette after taking sleeping pills and fell asleep while still holding the burning cigarette, which she could have ignited her own gown, ultimately leading to her death. Her daughter-in-law stated the cigarette dropped to her lap. Her fat was the fuel and kept her burning. There was nothing around her to burn. The floor was cement and the chair was by itself. And then you have Margaret Hogan, 89-year-old widow in Dublin, Ireland, was found burned almost to the point of complete destruction in 1970. Plastic flowers in the center of the room were reduced to liquid, and the television had a melted screen sitting 12 feet from the armchair, which the ashen remains were found. Otherwise, the surroundings were almost untouched. Her 2 feet and both legs from below the knees were undamaged. So yeah, the legs were still there below the knees. Small coal fire had been burning in the grate when the neighbor left the house the previous day. However, no connection between that fire and Mrs. Hogan's death could be connected. And the cause of the fire death is still unknown. And again, the chair, she was sitting in an armchair. That chair apparently was still there enough for her ashes to be in the chair. You would think at least the chair would go. No. I don't know if it was some kind of pleather, rubber, anything like that. You would still assume would burn, but most armchairs you think of is some kind of cloth. Yeah. Again, these are the kinds of things it's like, what the hell is going on? Beatrice Oxy, a 50-year-old woman, charred to death in her home in Bolingbrook, Illinois, 1979. Hey, don't say a whole lot on that one. For a change, here's a man, Henry Thomas, 73-year-old, burned to death in his living room in South Wales in 1980. Most of the body was incinerated, leaving only his skull and part of each leg below the knee. The feet and legs were still clothed in socks and trousers. Cloth, you would think that would catch fire, but it didn't. Half of the chair in which he was sitting was also destroyed. Half, not the whole chair. Police forensic officers decided that the incineration of Thomas was due to the wick effect. Which again, the wick effect does make some sense, but there are still things that are like, how the hell does this happen? Where fire don't act like fire. Does human fat work as a fuel that, while it burns readily, it doesn't catch fire? I mean, what is going on? 2010, Michael Faraday, a 76-year-old man in Ireland, recorded as spontaneous combustion by the coroner. The doctor made the statement that the fire was thoroughly investigated, and they're left with the conclusion that it fits into the category of spontaneous human combustion, for which there is no adequate explanation. And then finally it lists two cases, 1899. Yeah. Two kids in two different locations in the same house. That burned to death at the same time. Now, they were known to tend to want to play with fire and have been punished for that before, so. But still, it's like, weird. But yeah, it goes back 1798. Spontaneous human combustion. 1849 book. This is instances that are put into books by authors who say, who list examples of spontaneous human combustions for their character to die. 1798, 1849. Yeah. So it's been around for a while. It's been well known. There are theories, but there's still so much that's unexplained. Now, I'm kind of wondering if human fat don't act as a fuel, but also a fire retardant, or as a protective layer. How do some things burn and the rest of it doesn't? Noticeably, with like the chairs they sit in and stuff. How do parts of their body not burn, like below the knees? There's a big fat calf there, and socks and clothing that sometimes are just untouched. Now again, we know the feet don't necessarily burn that well. There's not really any fat on them. But still, you would figure socks, clothing would catch fire. You would figure calves, they've still got an amount of fat and muscle on them that should burn. You would figure they would catch fire, but you see some of them, it's like the legs below the knees still exist. It's weird. Yeah. And finally, just kind of prove my point, UFOs. Their sightings have been around for a long, long time. Of course, I kind of put the modern era of UFO sightings 47. Yeah, I think it was 1947 because that's when you have the Kenneth Arnold sighting and the Roswell incident. So it kind of brings us into the modern era of UFOs. And for those who don't know, Kenneth Arnold sighting, flying a plane. It's not like for an aircraft company or airline or anything. He's got his own plane. He was flying in Washington, and he sees some disc-like shapes that moved, and he called them. He said they moved like saucers skipping on the water. And of course, that's where the term flying saucer is born. But yeah, and then of course Roswell, the famous crash in Roswell, New Mexico. But just trying to give a look at the other side. There are things that's like we don't fully have understanding of. And that is something that can happen. With the spontaneous human combustion, I'm more along the lines of it's gruesome testing, but it's testing that needs to be done if you want to fully understand how human fat affects as a fuel source for fires. But and I ain't saying no live humans should be set afire. But understandings of how something like this could work is good to know. And there's still a lot we cannot fully comprehend. But especially with things like Bigfoot, UFOs, there is just so much evidence that cannot be brushed aside. A lot of it can. Because we can see some of it and go, yeah, you have a foil piece of cardboard wrapped in foil on a string you're filming. It's not a UFO. But, given the silly explanation, but yeah, there are still a lot of sightings and weird that we need to take a little more seriously, I guess is all I'm saying. And I kind of want to team this with the Occam's Razor skepticism video, because you need that skepticism, you need rational thought, but you also need to be willing to look outside the box a little bit. especially if the evidence deems it. If. That's a rare if, but there are occasions. You've got to go, okay. There is just clearly information we are missing. And most logical thoughts don't necessarily work in this situation. So we need to take this from a slightly different angle. Again, always first use that Occam's razor, that logic. But sometimes, yeah, there are cases you're like, none of this makes sense. None of it. But I just wanted to go ahead and kind of say that and take a look at some of these different things we could have looked at. So, yeah, I'll go ahead and put these links as usual in the description box below the video. But anyway, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting my links and sources, as I've already said, in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then,